Here we are again. Gregor, good to see you.
Hey, David. Nice to be back.
So we recorded an podcast episode on death and the lost art of grieving quite a long time ago. I think it might have been one of our first podcast episodes, actually.
Maybe, yeah. I think it's more than maybe 2.5 years ago, something like this.
Yeah. And so you shared that recently this topic has come up in various occasions and that you want to revisit that topic from a bit of a wider, different angle. So do you want to share in what contexts this came up?
Yes. So, I mean, grief is always a topic when you work with people, in my experience, or like at least in a more therapeutic range, because it's such a central human experience and also emotion. So the sadness and the process of grieving, of letting go of something, whatever that is always there to some degree. And I have always been fascinated with it, how little we attend to this in normal human life or modern life. And still, like a few weeks back, I had a workshop and suddenly it came up much bigger, and like it prompted me to have a dive into this again. And now here we are speaking. And the situation that happened in the workshop was we worked a lot around, in a way, the heart, and also what is required to open the heart, as it's often called, like open your heart, and like in new agey or spiritual terms, um, which has gotten a little bit like almost a bad reputation because it's been misunderstood so much, and it sounds a little like naive, but actually is one of the central hero journeys, I think, of being a human being, to really open your heart more and more to yourself and for pain in the world. And in that process, of course, we also look to what does close the heart, what are the things that make it difficult to open the heart again. And among many things, one really essential element that collectively came from the whole group, and um, it's a feature for most people, is unprocessed grief, which is like the pain and the sadness of losing something, somebody, some part of self. Can be literally anything. And if we don't move along with that process, which is the natural digestion of that change, something is lost, somebody's lost, somebody's gone, like the reality is different. And then you need a process to adapt to that new situation, new world, and sometimes very drastic new world that you're living in. And the change that is needed is coming through the process of grief. And when that's not happening, or hasn't been processed, or hasn't been given time, or there was not enough support, or it got stopped by trauma, let's say, then it's very difficult to keep the heart open, in very simple terms, for the new thing that might appear, for the new person that might come into your life, and the new opportunities that life presents. And then so life might get a little more dull, a little bit more sad, a little bit more depressed, maybe even. And so the story was actually a very simple one, that one woman said, yeah, she was mourning something like a life opportunity, about parenthood, basically, and where this was a long ongoing question mark, and then suddenly there was a time it was clear it's very likely not going to happen. And sharing that it was difficult for her to let go of the idea it might still happen, and to let go of the idea, or relax into the reality it very likely will not happen.
Hmm.
There were various reasons involved, and sharing that it was very, very difficult. Even she's been working on this for years, and she really did, very, very difficult to, in a way, to accept. And then we had a beautiful interaction and also a conversation in the group. So what does it mean then to let go and to accept? And really what it comes down to is that there is a process of life around grieving. And I often did quite a lot of webinars and workshops and podcasts also about anger. And it becomes more a topic, I think, now in the mainstream also, where people working on themselves feel like, oh, what's going on with anger? I need to understand that. And I think there's the counterpart. There's anger that's very much needing attention, how to work with that constructively and maturely. And there's also grief and sadness that is, maybe people wouldn't think at the first thought as something so difficult, but when you start looking into it, you feel like, wow, there's a lot that's going on there, or that's not going on there actually in individuals, but also I'm curious to look today a bit more at the implications even on collective dimensions of how we relate to this as a society, and how that maybe impairs us,
Yeah.
both individually and collectively, of really going forward. And there's a lot of talk these days of we needing to go forward. We need creative solutions for very complex global problems and overwhelming, maybe catastrophic scenarios. Like, so there's the need for freshness and renewal and change. And I think in the context of this, it's very interesting to look at why is that difficult, and what are potential limitations or things that are holding us back or impede us on that going forward. That's a bit the context out of which the impulse arose.
Nice. One thing that comes up for me really strongly when it comes to grief is this association, I think both from my family, so personally, but also more collectively, is that allowing myself to grieve is like a form of defeat. And that there's this sense of like not wanting to go there because it's admitting something that I don't want to admit. And also like I don't know if that's the same thing or a slightly different thing, but like this idea that like grieving doesn't feel like a rational process. And like if I rationally understand that I need to let go of something, like that should be enough. Like I got it, okay, it's over.
Exactly.
Can we just put it aside now?
Can we just, if you complete that sentence, what would that voice say? Can we
Oh,
just?
can we just put it aside now? Like it's in the past.
Exactly.
Like why need to dwell on this?
Yeah. I got it. It's over. Thank you. Let's carry on.
Yeah. I've to, and it's like I've learned my lessons. Like, I can do so many things on a mental level, but to really go into the emotional experience. And I think that's also a little bit of what we talked about in the last episode on grief, is like it's a little death in and of itself. Like there's a sense of surrender and letting go in the act of allowing myself even to feel that grief.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And just to the last point, that's exactly it. It is a death, but that's all life is like this, or it's one essential element of life that I allow myself to die in small and big ways again and again, because every renewal, every real freshness, every real new start actually comes out of letting go of something, which means not controlling, not grasping, not holding on, not fighting against that. It goes away. It's like my breath, it goes out, it empties my whole body, and then it comes in again. And it's even in spiritual languages like the breath, even the pause between the out breath and the in breath, there's many meditations on that. If you just pause there for a tiny, tiny, tiny moment, it feels like death. The thing is, there is actually a conundrum there that because we have so much unprocessed grief in our collective psyches and in our collective bodies, we already land in a place in a we live through life that we have individually and collectively a lot of stuff experienced that we maybe have not fully processed, and it's not somebody's fault, it's just how it is to some degrees, so that we are already a little bit scared of that letting go.
Mm.
And at the same time, it's like because we're scared of that letting go, it becomes more scary because we're holding on, and then we suddenly find ourselves in patterns that are actually not supportive for life, or they were once maybe protective but now become limitations to renewal and refreshment. And I just can tell you in the story, like in that workshop, what we then actually did was to really prepare that, and then for a few hours in one afternoon we actually did something like a grieving ritual together. But it's not like, or let's say I could even invite listeners, when you listen in, when you hear the word we did a grieving ritual together, what's the first mental image
Mm.
that you come up with?
Mm.
Or even the emotional association, does that feel like, wow, great, I would love to do that? Or it's like, oh my God, such a morbid and sordid thing, they're going to be like sitting there in black and I don't know? Or is it like a very somber and serious picture that comes up in you? And in all of this, whatever you associate first with, like what you said, like what you say associated with is like, suddenly it's like, okay, now I go into defeatism, like, oh, I did everything and now I still have to admit
Yeah.
I'm lost.
Yeah. Life got the better of me.
Yes. And so it's like, it's the one thing to avoid. And if I can avoid grieving, the faulty but still internal logic would be that I still haven't lost, basically.
Yeah.
So I just, no, I don't like, I get it, but I keep going. So we all have a lot of stored patterns. There are cultural artifacts. Different cultures, different religions have vastly different ways of relating to this, out of different narratives and developments of the tribe or the society from sometimes for hundreds of years. So maybe you have all your own associations, and then I can just share a little how what we did was very simple. It's just very modern rituals to put on some music and to invoke that sense in the heart where there's places that have pain, and sometimes and just allowing that pain, and also because it's a very embodied experience. Just as we said before, we try to process so much in our modern world through our intellect and through our rationality, while not understanding that what we call rationality is not just mature reasoning. It's often the process of disconnecting our thinking from our body and from our emotions, which then become a very limited human experience. So to sink into a deeper part of ourselves that hold all these informations and stored unintegrated processes, and just allowing them through voice, through movement, through breath, and very simple, nothing radical. At least that's what we did there. Nothing pushy, but just allowing that to come up. And it's so fascinating. I've done that in small and big ways in groups many times. And people are skeptical before, as they should be, and they go like they're scared before, as it's normal. Everybody has their own associations and fears and worries and things coming up, or like big expectation. They're going to go in there and sob for 3 hours and they're going to feel like this afterwards. And sometimes this is exactly what happens, and sometimes it's much simpler and much more profound even. And so everybody has an experience of like connecting to something or not connecting too much, and it can be often also very personal, that you have something that suddenly comes up from maybe even a long time
Mm,
ago, or very recent, or even small things that seemingly your mind registered as, yeah, it's okay, it's life. We
mm,
kind of like minimize the impact of certain things often. And then when you go really into your heart or in your body, or you have a space, suddenly something pops up and you feel like, but yeah, that really impacted me. Like, and it can be, I lost my job, or I lost an opportunity at my job, or I had to move house, or I wanted to move house even, and then I'm missing the old place, or I'm just missing that corner in the garden. Like, I've heard stories about everything basically, or suddenly feeling like I suddenly feeling um, the loss that I felt when my favorite teddy bear stuffed animal like got lost when I was 5 years old, and I got a new one. It was not a big thing, and suddenly you feel like, wow, I felt the impact.
mm,
And I could imagine if you're listening to this now, sometimes we have these ways of like, yeah, but come on, I mean, what's the big thing here? And it's true, but it's also like we are very poor judges, or let's say our mind is a very poor judge of what is really essential and meaningful to us. And so we go into this space, is like we did in that ritual, and suddenly stuff comes up, and it's not about making a drama of it, but just allowing it to be there in the way it shows up.
mm,
And then we just stayed with this for a while and became very gentle. And the most amazing thing is that afterwards, everybody was a little surprised, either that it's not so dramatic, or that, oh, it's much more interesting, or it's much more meaningful, or like, wow, I was much more emotional than I thought. So everybody got surprised in their version of the process. And the most interesting is how everybody feels much lighter, much softer, and way more connected. The
mm,
group went into a very, very beautiful connected space, and we were already a few days together. And this was like towards the end of it, so other stuff had happened as well. But it felt like a significant shift. I was so touched and so heartened and so happy
mm,
afterwards. Again, we had a celebration that evening, and it was just
mm,
one of the most beautiful spaces recently I've been in. Again, it taught me that, wow, it's so important when we take the lid off, when we unburden the heart. And again, grief is a very central way of doing that. It's much easier to connect to ourselves, to others. It's much easier to care, to feel empathic
mhm.
towards ourselves and others. Like all these good natural human qualities just start to come forward much easier. And we don't have to like, how do I open my heart? It's like,
Mhm.
oh, there's a good reason why it doesn't feel so easy. And we don't have to stretch it open, but just invite what is holding it back from doing the next step in that journey.
Yeah,
And so that was the experience again in that with the group. And yeah, a little bit lost in just telling the story because it's so nice. I don't know
that's
where
fine.
else I was with
It's
with
beautiful.
with the track of talking about grief. And yeah, so
Oh,
it's a very, maybe we can talk about this also a bit more, um that essentially, or naturally speaking, grief is a very connective experience. It's something that people for most part want to do together.
mm,
It is best done in rituals, in community, and it's something that goes through many different stages, and it can include often a lot of anger also. That's why the anger conversation is also very important here. And so grief has many different faces, and ways of how it shows up, and people grieve very differently often,
mm,
and we need to respect it and still find a little bit the common ground,
mm,
because it makes us, like not so many other things, very human.
mm,
We all grieve
yeah.
because we all lost people, self images, experiences. um, it's just, it's unmistakably, absolutely a part of human life.
Yeah, and we all grieve because we all love. Like
Exactly.
we wouldn't grieve without really caring about something.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. Like you say, it shows that you care. It
yeah,
shows that your heart is in it.
yeah.
And I've had that from personal experience, and I've seen that with so many people in my career, and I've known, heard it from so many other people, that significant loss processed can be a significant widening of your
Mm,
heart's
mm,
capacity to care and to love. Like, I think almost nothing else can do.
mm. Yeah, there's an image that that I've been having while you were speaking that I think fits to what you're just describing. I was thinking of, so I was first thinking, why don't we grieve? And for me, it's quite evident that there's like a survival mechanisms, intelligence in there, as in, well, if my life is at stake, yeah, there's no space for grieving. I need to take care of things. Like I can only grieve if I'm relatively safe. And so just acknowledging like, yeah, there are times where it totally makes sense not to grieve, and I will, I think also that's why ritual makes sense, like to create spaces, clear containers where it then can go into this. Um, and then the image that I had was that allowing ourselves collectively to grieve is like a metamorphosis. Like I was thinking of like the caterpillar and the butterfly. It's like this process of um opening up to something which is not in my control. And there's this element of it's a little death, or it is a death, and I don't know exactly what will come out on the other side. But there's also the possibility of like something even more magnificent and
Mm,
evolved and integrated to come out on the other side. And
mm.
yeah, somehow this image made me really happy of like
Yeah,
even like as a like where we are as a humanity and what what we can grow into and what might be needed for that and what role grief can actually play in that.
yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah, and I got very happy and touched when you said, like, when you described that, and I saw that in your face also, like, oh, it makes me very happy.
Mm,
And that's the seemingly contradiction
mm,
that, again, is often, very, very often, the experience of people. When you really allow the grief, you come out happy. And happy is not like the opposite of like sad, or happy is not the absence of intensity or even of pain, but it's the completeness of the experience, of the acceptance of the human being, and that life hurts,
mm,
and that it's a good thing. We don't have to fight it. And as we often now are, sometimes I think also in a societal or collective trance, where we invested very much in like, how do we make life in a way that it doesn't hurt, and what we've somehow unconsciously produce is more pain,
mm,
more subtle dimensions of it. So there is this acceptance of like, this is how life is, and if I'm in, and I don't need to do it alone, I find community there. I find ways to do that. I find ways to do it wise and timely, like you said before, that there are times where it's absolutely intelligent to shut that process down because some other things more important, functional, life needs to be taken care of.
Yeah.
but I don't stop there, and I open that process again, and it just feels enlivening. It feels happy. It makes creative, and you could see that in the people. Like everybody was just at functioning at a much higher capacity level after
Mhm.
that. And it's not something that's just like it's a moment. It can really. I've had also the experience with a client individually some time ago who came in with something, and then suddenly what appeared was like that there was a lot of unprocessed grief. And when that started to really melt and come out, suddenly a lot of the original symptoms that the person described as bothering just started to melt away and disappear.
Mm.
And so it has a huge power.
Mm.
And then I like also what you say about how much that feels like a metamorphosis, like a real transformation. And it is that kind of sense I need to go in and die a little, and I cannot control it.
And I
It's
found
just
it
that we're
funny
like,
how before when you were describing it, like the ritual, how everyone was like anticipating, oh, like how this pattern of trying to control the grieving process, how it shows up, like, oh,
exactly.
I'm gonna I'm gonna experience a lot of intensity or not, and how exactly like it's very likely gonna be very different from how I anticipated.
Yeah, almost 100% given. I mean, maybe you have a good intuition of, but like it's like, we cannot control and grasp mind's processes, life's processes with our mind. Life is there to be lived and to be experienced. And there's one thing that I found interesting. You said like, yeah, but if it's not safe, it's also good to not go into that. And somebody working with trauma and bringing very passionate about having trauma informed approaches, I 100% agree to that. And there's a little, I think, um variation to that also, that so that's an individual perspective. Am I safe right now to do
Mm.
that? Yes. But is there also collectively the permission
Mm.
to go into that, and how that maybe translates into individual
Mhm.
safety or not?
Yeah.
Because if you read about, let's say, tribal rituals around grief, and they had rituals for many different things, all significant changes of life, death, birth, initiation rituals, and stuff like this. And again, I'm not a proponent of saying like that was the golden age back then and everything good, but there is still, I think, a lot that we can learn from smaller communities that had very functional ways of surviving for many tens or hundreds of thousands of years.
Mm.
That, of course, is a little bit complex, more complex now living in this globalized world, but still the principles, I think, are super interesting. So you had often cultures that barely managed to get their crops in and all of this, but still, um, when somebody died,
Mm.
everything would stop, and stop sometimes for good for 2 3 days.
Mm.
Imagine that in a modern day world,
Mm.
like everything stops. The town that you're living in,
Mm.
everything stops. And I don't mean like with every individual, but like a significant portion of the population. It would just stop and give time to this. And so there is also a permission that creates a safety, that
Mm.
we say this is important, we're doing this now.
Yeah.
And it's okay if you feel a little bit dysfunctional because you're embedded in a container for these 2 3 days. And we know the process, we know the movement. It's like what we do in that rituals, like we invite people and say like, we know what we're doing, we have done this before, there's ways to make this more safe and individual for you, but let's go on the journey together.
Mhm.
But we really don't have ways for that anymore on a societal level. And then we even have placeholders in the absence of conscious rituals. We have unconscious belief systems and structures that value functionality over everything else. And then of course it's like, no, how can I allow myself to go into that, and what will happen, and I will crash and I will crumble and I will not be able to whatever. And of course we absorb that from young age. we we see how the big ones are dealing with it.
Mm.
um, and there are sometimes probably ways where this is more healthy, and sometimes ways where this is less healthy, or if everybody got shocked by maybe a sudden death or a sudden experience, a sudden loss. And then you see, when you then work with adults, how almost sometimes time stopped at a
Mhm.
certain, like a certain element of that individual's life stopped,
Yeah.
and it couldn't actually continue expanding, flourishing, developing, becoming more intelligent. So in a way, it's like a reduction of life's intelligence and capacity at that time.
Hmm. So the differentiation you wanted to make was, it's true that if we're really not safe, it makes sense not to grieve, but there's a dimension of I don't feel safe to go into grieving that is not like there's an actual threat, but more of like a societal, um, like a like an unwritten agreement contract of what is allowed and what is not allowed, and that it can feel unsafe to go into grief because of those agreements.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, what also comes to my mind is how I think we also mentioned this in the last episode where we talked about grief, around how grieving is something that somehow we're supposed to do like privately, and like our public face should look way more joyful and functional and
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and one comment to this, when you say like it can feel as if it's not safe, I really don't want to dispute that it really can feel like this, absolutely. But that is also almost like an appropriate response to the lack of connection and support that would come from the outside. So if
Mhm.
there's a tribe, family, extended community around you holding you in that,
Yeah.
it will feel individually different. For example, I've heard um, some some time ago, I was speaking with a friend who's from Israel, who's Jewish, and she shared that there is, I don't know if that's in all across Jewish culture, I don't know, but she said there is a, often when somebody dies in the family, what happens if the extended family and the neighbors and everybody, the community comes around,
Mhm.
comes to the house, and the people most affected, maybe the spouse, the nearest people, in a way they're being set down.
Yeah.
And maybe you know about that, I mean, Jewish background. And in a way they're like put there and said like, now you just grieve,
Yes.
and we cook and we take care and we run all the errands and we manage everything that's going on there, so you just have space to go through whatever you need to go through right
Mhm.
now. And I found that super beautiful and touching, because in my lifetime I've had experiences with death in the family. I mean, normal, it's like human, everybody will face that. And then, when you're adult, and as kids, you just feel the impact of that. So when like there's stuff to do, and then, like there's a lot to do, often you have to do the whole legal thing, and then you
Yeah.
have to proceed to organize the funeral. Then you need to, everybody expects you also to inform them and then tell, and la la la. And so you're overwhelmingly busy. And some part of it is good because it gives you also structure, but I've heard that from many people, that after everything is done, then the big crash comes, because
Yes.
the functional energy is like leaving, and then you're not busy with distracting yourself anymore, and then it comes in. And so I found it very beautiful to,
Mm.
when there's an awareness of like, this people now will go through a process, and we're all going through a process, but there's degrees of intensity.
Yeah.
We hold that together.
Hmm.
And then it's also, it sends a very different signal. It's not like, oh, we expect you to be brave and strong, but maybe also probably you're not doing good, but we not talk about that. So it sends a very clearly signal. We understand this is painful. You're gonna cry. You're gonna have all the emotions. Maybe not feel anything, whatever.
Yeah.
And we're there for you. And you just have the right to have that experience just the way you're having it.
Mm.
And so my, in a way, another impulse for then talking here with you and in the podcast about this is also my renewed curiosity, or kind of like a vision that I would so love to see how it would be if in our modern world we would find ways to bring this back or bring this anew
Mm-hmm.
into our lives. So how would it be if there is, for example, like in every village or town or district of a town, there is a designated place or maybe a designated time with volunteers or professionals or people
Mm-hmm.
that know how to do stuff like this, where there is on a regular basis, there's a grieving ritual,
Mm-hmm.
and people are invited to drop in, maybe get support, and you can join in, and maybe you have an actual grief to process. Maybe there's nothing actual from your life, but like you just feel the world, and there's like a effing lot of stuff to grieve all the time. It's just like the capacity to feel into the pain of the world, and you have a space to have a good cry and maybe a good laugh and a good expression of your emotions, because grieving again doesn't mean that you're just crying and you're going to be sad. It can be that all these different emotions and mixed contradictory thoughts even are just having a space to be there.
Yeah.
So how would it be if we have spaces like this and they're not tied to a confession, there's not tied to whatever. I mean, it's just very raw thinking right now. What that would do to ourselves as human beings, to the connections we feel with other people,
Mm-hmm.
and then how that what that would do to us as a collective, as a culture, as a nation, and so on. Just imagine there's a place you can go to when your heart's sad. There's a place you go to, and it's not a you don't have to find only your individualist expressions of like listening to your favorite sad songs or
Mm-hmm.
going to a walk in the forest where it's a little bit dark and shady. You can have a cry as nobody sees you, or writing sad poetry. I mean, all these things are great, but where there's a place where this is happening to some degree in contact with other humans, and you will count what that would do to your sense of connection to other people, and that we learn about that's part of life and we take care, and you go through and you come out changed, transformed. I
Mm-hmm.
think I'll really and maybe it's completely naive and unrealistic, but I
I
like
don't think
the
so, to be honest. I really like the image, and I imagine it's like, I think one of the things that needs to happen is that, just like we've understood that depression is a real thing, or like taking care of our mental health is a real thing, that we need, I mean, there's probably stuff that happens before that, but then at some point people in power be like, hey, yeah, for the well-being of our country and our society, actually grief is really important. And because of that, like to kind of like change the narrative about it, and then be like, yeah, and because we understand that that's really important, here are ways that you can be supported or support the process of collective grieving.
yes, totally. It's beautiful the way you frame it, and it's true. It's because already the narrative to some degree has changed.
Yeah.
It's more talk about mental health that includes that it's okay to be sad and all of these kind of things. And yet I think what is not yet happening is that we understand that this is something that needs to be done best in community. So
Yeah.
there is an individual permission for that, but it's still like, yeah, it's okay if you come home and you feel sad, or if you call in sick at work or whatever, and you need to take care, and you go to your, bring it to your therapist. And these are all great
Mm,
markers of progress. But how would it be like, yeah, we understand we need to do this together. We need to find new ways, new tools, new consciousness technologies, if you will,
mm,
to do that. And like maybe for some people, the word ritual is totally off-putting already. It's like,
mm,
what are you talking?
yeah.
It's a consciousness technology basically that helps you stay more clear and clean and healthy.
Yeah.
And if we have professionals that are really good at that and facilitating this, because otherwise we find other ways. I mean, there's maybe a rock concert where there is somebody, or a concert where somebody's really good in tapping into that frequency and everybody's touched,
Mm,
and they feel a little bit better because somebody kind of like have some kind of emotional release. Or you watch it now, we're recording this in June 2024, there's the European Football Championship happening. A lot of people feel permission to go into very strong emotional expressions that they otherwise would not allow themselves to go into, including a lot of men that never cry these days and feel very strongly about things. And so like we have in like let's say unconscious or not unintentional spaces for this. But and again, we have that a lot also in therapeutic settings, and maybe even group therapy and in workshops and stuff like this. These things happen. This is also what I'm talking about. Is not something like, ooh, I just discovered the golden egg nobody ever has seen before. This is standard therapeutic knowledge to some degree, I would say.
Although I think that this collective piece, and I like, I think I imagine even in therapeutic circles, that's not as clear that
No,
that's needed. And I think that would also be the biggest challenge, thinking in how to introduce this to a larger society is I imagine what would happen is that all the reasons and all the hurts would come up of like why I would not want to grieve with those people, right? Like all the reasons why, okay, fine, like maybe I'll do it with like my family or something like this, but why should I be doing it? Like all those like ways that we uh disconnect from other people that maybe live super close around us. Um,
totally,
and yeah, like I'd be curious what would be necessary to address that, because that's what would, I think what would come up first is like
totally,
not gonna I'm not gonna I'm a football fan of this team. Like why would you want to grieve with why would I want to grieve the loss of my team? And potentially like fans of the other team would be there. Like not gonna do that.
exactly. I'm just
To take
wondering
like
if you're
a
speaking from personal experience.
yeah, and to take like an example that is not as sensitive as like other potential examples I could bring.
Yeah, but yeah, no, totally. And just gonna at the same time, you get probably a variety of potential answers, which is like, okay, I would do that with my family, or somebody was like, that's
Yeah.
that's the last place I would go to and show my emotions. So
Yes.
yeah, and all these sensitivities are there. They're real, and they're important, and they also are habits that can be addressed. And I'm very clear when I put out this vision. I know it's a some way it's a radical vision. It be
Mm,
radical because it has a lot of implications of how we generally see ourselves as humans, to see the desired way of how to be a human being right now. Like it changes a lot of narratives and values that are implicit. And at the same time, it's not radical at all. It's very simple, it's very human, and we have done that as humans for longer times than we have not done it.
yeah.
But we don't know how that will will happen going forward. And just if I'm thinking about a situation like this or a scenario like this where you can come in, you can process your own, you can process the pain of others, and maybe we will actually need that so desperately that we have spaces to grieve the world, letting go of the world that we knew. Like all the collective challenges we're having is like that we're needing to let go of a world that we knew and is not gonna happen going forward anymore.
Yeah.
So this world with everything that we kind of consciously know almost, we need to let go or is dying. And I mean this even from perspective of values and orientations. But for a lot of people, it's going to be or is already like a hardcore physical reality. You need to let go of your life, the area that you're living, and so forth and so forth. So there's so much all the time that goes on, but it's not being addressed because we have that, yeah, go forward, see the opportunity, see the possibility, kind of like mentalization of positivity, which is great, but really not all that we need.
Yeah.
And so the possibility or the potential of something like this, in my understanding, is huge. And it's a bit like, how would it be to make the world more grief informed? Maybe we're gonna have the podcast title now. I don't know. Towards grief informed.
Trauma informed was
Most
yesterday. Next thing is
exactly,
brief.
it's grief informed, and to know how much had to happen that people were picking up on the thread and the importance of trauma for many decades, so that it became something more, a little bit more mainstream. And it's still a long way to go. So I think you're absolutely right. There'd be a lot of stuff come up, a lot of pushbacks, a lot of like why that's not possible, why that's not a good idea. Maybe even the therapeutic mental health segment was like, are you fucking nuts? Like, you want to make everybody go crazy? I'm sure if stuff like this would happen well, that psychosomatic symptoms would drop dramatically.
Yep.
Like dramatically.
Yep.
And yeah, and it would need a lot to embed that in reality and not just land it like a spaceship as a thing we're going to do now, but that it really speaks to people. um, but I just feel like I get passionate about the vision and the possibility.
Yeah, me too. I'm my inner how do you say? Let's say entrepreneur, like doer, is like, cool, yeah, let's do it. It's
Yeah,
gonna take some time. It's good. It's not gonna be easy, but I don't know. Like somehow I have a sense of. I feel like the process forward is quite straightforward in the sense that like it's gonna be like growing circles of people who adopt it. You know, like
totally.
of course, like not everyone at first is gonna be like that's the new thing, but like grow it gradually, and at some point you have leaders of communities who maybe before were like no, that's maybe even against our whatever religion and stuff like that, to say like, hey, no, you can actually, it's part of it, let's do it.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's just with everything. It's just the way forward. It's just do the steps that are meaningful, which I'm taking. And I would also maybe use this as a platform now to ask people, do you have experiences with things like this? Do you know people that are really good in facilitating rituals, spaces for grief? And I don't mean just individually. I think every decent therapist should be able to do that. And as you also said, unfortunately, it's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
It really is not. So if therapists themselves, which are human beings for the most part, AI hasn't taken over yet, haven't done their own grief work in a significant way, you will not be comfortable to open that in another person. Um, so yeah, it's really like a research question. Do you know spaces, people, facilitators, methods community practices, whatever that are experienced in this. And maybe we don't, for sure, we don't always have to invent everything anew, but I'd
Mm,
be curious to start a little discussion, conversation, inquiry
yes.
into this.
Yeah. Yeah. For those listening, either send us an email or respond on YouTube below the podcast or on Facebook. I'm going to actually add one. I haven't experienced this person personally, but I heard very good things. His name is David Cates, and he recently did something called Facing Collapse Together. So, like acknowledging the reality, pretty much what you were saying, like the world as we know it will not stay like that, and that um, yeah, finding ways collectively to kind of grieve that.
Beautiful. And the last line, just maybe that's the underlying premise of when we face collapse or letting go, the process of grieving is making sure that we don't relate to this reality, whatever the reality is, out of resignation or disconnection or being like overcome by it, but that we accept it and see it for what it is. And in that, feel more connected and more empowered and more resourced to be with the way it is right now.
Yes.
And if we don't grieve, if we don't process, if we don't go through the journey that will feel like a little death or a big one, we have for sure certain elements in ourselves that will feel either stuck in resignation or needing to, like you said in the beginning, like making sure that for sure I'm not going to be overwhelmed by this and I'm still coming out triumphant. So like I'll create conflicts within myself. And so doing this together, individually and together, I think yeah, is helping us to find the energy that will move us forward.
Mhm. Nice closing words. Thanks for that
Yeah.
conversation, Gregor. As always, I will add this would, I don't know if require, but at least invite a follow-up conversation. So we'll see.
Potentially.
Yes.
Maybe next week, maybe in 2 years down the timeline, we see.
Exactly. So
Yeah, and thank you, David, for the great, inspiring conversation, and thank you everybody for listening. And I'm really, really curious to hear from you about what's happening to you when you hear us talk. Thoughts, visions, resources. Love to start a conversation about this.
yes.